Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first open house for the Town of Halton Hills Cultural Heritage Master Plan. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. As Megan mentioned, we are recording this session and we'll be uploading it to our Let's Talk Halton Hills page. So if you prefer to keep your camera off, please feel free to do so. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. My name is Laura Loney, and I'm the Senior Heritage Planner for the Town of Halton Hills. You'll be hearing from a few different people today, including town staff, heritage consultants, our ERA Architects, Inc., and members of Halton Hills Town Council. I'd like to welcome Mayor Rick, Councillor Brown, Councillor Somerville, Councillor Lewis, Councillor Albano, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Lawler, and Councillor Farrell-Reid. Mayor Rick Bennett and Councillor Ted Brown will be starting us off with some opening remarks. Welcome, Mayor Bennett and Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Laura. And on behalf of members of council, I'd like to welcome you to the Cultural Heritage Master Plan Open House tonight. Engaging with you, as well as partners and stakeholders in the town, is critical to developing a cultural heritage master plan that will incorporate best practices from a planning perspective. So we'd like to thank you for joining us tonight and for visiting the Let's Talk Halton Hills site to provide feedback and learn more about the Cultural Heritage Master Planning process. We look forward to hearing from you tonight. The Cultural Master Plan will provide the tools required to identify, protect, and celebrate Halton Hills and diverse cultural heritage resources. A project steering committee had been established to encourage dialogue between the town and residents throughout the process and to provide input into the Cultural Heritage Master Plan. I'd now like to introduce you to Councillor Ted Brown, Chair of the Steering Committee, to tell you more about the work of this group. So welcome, Councillor Brown.
Councillor Brown, would you mind turning your mute off?
With the wind, I'm wondering if he's having technical difficulties.
No, I'm good.
Oh, you're good? Oh, good.
Yeah. Do you want me to start from the front top?
Yeah.
The committee is made up of members of council, town staff, and 4 members of the community, including residents and representatives from local heritage organizations. The committee's mandate is to provide comments during the review, identify issues and concerns, and help generate solutions, liaise with key community members to ensure project awareness. Since the Cultural Heritage Master Plan started in May of 2021, a robust public engagement process has been delivered for the project. A Let's Talk Halton Hills page featuring engagement tools, survey questions, and a mapping tool has been established to help the project team collect public feedback through the process. Meetings will be held with the Technical Advisory Committee, which is called the TAC, and the Steering Committee through all phases of the project. And staff have also reached out to key stakeholders to gather additional feedback. Your input is invaluable to us in our work, and I'd like to thank you again for being here tonight. Back to you, Laura.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councillor Brown. We're holding this evening's workshop, or open house rather, to provide you with some background for the study process, give you an overview of what's involved, and provide you with an opportunity to give your input on the development of the Cultural Heritage Master Plan for the town. This open house is part of the consultation part of this project and meets the consult level of the engagement spectrum in the town's public engagement charter. We welcome your input, and in the spirit of the 3 pillars of our public engagement charter, transparency, notification, and participation, we would like to remind everyone of the need to respect the space, our fellow presenters, and attendees. This allows us to maximize our time together and provide a safe space for everyone to be heard. We'll now move on to an overview of tonight's agenda. So during this meeting tonight, we'll be taking you through the background to this plan and why the town has prioritized the project. ERA, our heritage consultants, will be providing an overview of the existing conditions of heritage in Halton Hills, which will be followed by an opportunity for a question and answer period and further discussion. Lastly, we'll take you through the next steps for this project. This slide identifies the many objectives we have for this cultural heritage master plan as a town. The master plan will identify the community's heritage conservation goals, help us consolidate a vision that reflects the community's values, and define a strategic approach and policies for the conservation of identified heritage resources. We also have a significant opportunity here to establish meaningful relationships and consultation with Indigenous communities as part of this process. The background work will help us identify potential cultural heritage landscapes, so beyond individual heritage properties, as well as identify best practices in cultural heritage resource management. Lastly, ERA will be helping the town identify strategies and barriers to heritage conservation and recommend approaches for researching, evaluating, and designating significant cultural heritage resources. I'll now turn it over to Emma Abramovitz, the project lead from ERA Architects. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks so much, Laura. So as mentioned, my name is Emma Abramowitz, and I'm the project manager for the Cultural Heritage Master Plan from the ERA Architects Heritage Consultant side. We've been working on the Cultural Heritage Master Plan project since we were engaged back in May of this year. And the project itself is split into two phases. There's project initiation and background review in phase 1, and then in phase 2, the development of the Cultural Heritage Master Plan. At this point where we're coming to you tonight, we're just over halfway through the first phase. And this phase that we're in is really all about information gathering from a variety of sources so that we can understand the existing conditions of the heritage program and any factors that might be influencing it in Halton Hills, and then set ourselves up to best develop a master plan that addresses the existing challenges and opportunities here. So what type of information are we gathering right now? We've been conducting an in-depth overview of Halton Hills history. We've been doing some mapping of Halton Hills heritage resources and the ways that they overlap with other interesting factors. We've been undertaking a policy review, and then we've been concurrently running some stakeholder engagement, which has included the survey and interactive mapping exercise that's already been mentioned, that's available on the Let's Talk Halton Hills website, as well as a targeting working session with some key stakeholder groups from various disciplines. We've also been in communication with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the Huron-Wendat Nation, both of whose traditional territory includes the land on which Halton Hills exists today. The Mississaugas of the Credit are treaty rights holders in Halton Hills, and they're currently providing feedback on, particularly right now, the historical research piece, so that we can make sure that our written history and analysis includes non-colonial perspectives. All of this information is currently being consolidated into an existing conditions report, which includes a public consultation paper. The idea is that the existing conditions report and public consultation paper will become the jumping off point for the development of strategies, responses, policies, and other initiatives in the Cultural Heritage Master Plan when that starts in early 2022. To share the progress that's been made to date, I'm going to take the next few minutes and give a brief overview of the existing conditions that we've uncovered so far, and then talk a little bit about how those might feed into the Cultural Heritage Master Plan. And we'll then open up the floor for a question and answer session. So, as one component of the existing conditions report, we're developing an historic context statement for Halton Hills. The historic context statement takes all of the historical research we've undertaken, including resources and feedback from the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and consolidates it into a chronological history. It then provides a bit of an analysis of that history, organizing important stories under a thematic framework. Our research and analysis has identified 3 themes of significance in Halton Hills. First, that Halton Hills transportation networks, both natural and human-made, have influenced its development and evolution. This ranges over time from the use of the Credit River for travel and trade to the ways the railroad built through Georgetown and Acton grew those communities at the expense of other hamlets, to the ways that the 401 has defined and will continue to define the urban character at Halton Hills South End. The second theme is that Halton Hills natural systems and resources have laid the foundation for evolving local economies, including pre-contact fisheries and horticulture along the Credit River, early contact mills using power from the Credit River, and then lime kilns, tanneries, and agriculture that all have relied on local natural resources. The third theme is that Halton Hills' social fabric has been shaped by immigration and migration, from the arrival of a British colonial administration that displaced the Mississaugas of the Credit, to early English, Scottish, and Irish settlers who built churches all through Esqueecing Township, immigrants drawn by major industrial employment like at the Beardmore Tanneries and along the railway, and institutions and figures like the Canadian Jewish Farm School or the Armenian Boys Farm Home, or like famed PEI native Lucy Maud Montgomery, who've all had an impact on the development of Halton Hills. This analytical approach to understanding Halton Hills history provides us with a bit of a framework through which to understand the existing roster of municipal heritage resources, what's protected and what maybe should be protected to keep telling those stories and communicating those heritage values. And speaking of which, as another component of the existing conditions report, we're undertaking an analysis of the existing heritage register and inventory as a data set. This data set includes heritage register properties, so those that are listed or designated, and heritage inventory properties that might have no formal status right now, but have somehow been identified for prospective heritage value, like through, for example, the Premier Gateway Secondary Plan study. We've taken those 813 properties and broken them down by a few different sets of analyses, like what's their heritage status, how many are listed versus designated versus inventoried, or what types of buildings and properties are represented. For example, there are 29 places of worship that are currently considered heritage resources. We're looking at where all those heritage resources are located in urban places and historically urban places like villages or hamlets, or in places that are completely rural still. And then what eras of development are represented or maybe underrepresented in the heritage register and inventory. We're also mapping out all these register and inventory properties so that we can really see where there are big clusters of resources and develop a better understanding of Halton Hills' development and evolution over time. As a complementary exercise, the existing conditions report will include an overview of the provincial, regional, and municipal policies that have some bearing on Halton Hills' heritage program, either because they include heritage policies themselves or because they might affect heritage resources through totally separate policies. So we're looking at some standard provincial policies like the provincial policy statement, the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and then notably the Greenbelt and Niagara Escarpment plans that have some major implications for the northwestern portion of town. We're looking at the Halton Region Official Plan, the Halton Hills Official Plan, and secondary plans for places like Norval and Glen Williams, because all of those have policies that are specific to heritage properties. And then we're also looking at other policies like future land use designations or developments that may have implications for clusters of heritage resources, and at policies that might be complementary to the heritage program, like the existing cultural master plan and public art master plan, so that we can make sure that the cultural heritage master plan, which addresses treatment of heritage resources under the Ontario Heritage Act, will properly complement those existing initiatives. The existing conditions report will also look at ways that that policy framework and other factors and the roster of heritage resources intersects to present opportunities and challenges for the heritage program as it moves forward. So for example, we're studying where future growth areas might intersect with rural resources and character, or even urban heritage resources and character. So, for example, at major transit station areas that are looking to see some more intensification in mature neighborhoods in Georgetown and Acton, or where a future highway corridor might intersect with potentially significant historic farmsteads. We want to understand where those intersections are going to happen so that we can sort of develop strategic initiatives to help manage change. We'll study where hamlets with clusters of heritage resources sit almost entirely within the floodplain and where there might be risk for future kind of climate change things that are going to be happening. And then we're also looking at intersections between heritage resources and specific locations or building types that might offer the potential to drive cultural economic development in Halton Hills. The idea is that all of this information gathering and analysis, combined with the results of the public engagement that we'll be collecting at the end of this month, is setting us up to start developing the Cultural Heritage Master Plan. We want the Cultural Heritage Master Plan to go beyond the typical policies common to most Ontario municipalities in order to address the specific and unique conditions in Halton Hills and to develop change management strategies that are targeted at what we might expect to see here in the future. The Cultural Heritage Master Plan will set out a vision and objectives. It'll develop specific strategic initiatives, policies, and guidelines and incentive programs. And it'll all be informed by precedents and best practices that we might include as examples of how to drive the type of heritage conservation and celebration that we'd all like to see here. With that brief overview of what we've done so far and where we're hoping to go from here, I'm going to turn it back over to Laura to open up our Q&A session for the evening.
Thank you so much, Emma. And I'd just like to acknowledge Councillor Hurst, who joined us shortly after our opening remarks. As Emma noted, we're now going to open the floor for a question and answer period to give you a chance to ask any questions that you might have on your mind about what's been presented here today or other cultural heritage issues in the town. You'll notice that you're currently muted, but please feel free to raise your hand using the reactions tool at the bottom of your screen. It's the little happy face on the right, and a staff member will call on you and unmute your mic for you. We'll begin by answering raised hands, followed by any questions in the chat. And all questions received this evening will also be posted to the Cultural Heritage Master Plan project page on Let's Talk Halton Hills. If we happen to go over tonight's allotted time, any additional questions not answered will be posted there as well. So we framed these questions in 4 different areas for you just to kind of frame our discussion. So first, we'll be asking questions about existing conditions review and what Emma has gone over. We can also look at questions about process and timelines and the Cultural Heritage Master Plan itself, and then leave it open for any general questions you might have. So we'll start with existing conditions review. We've identified a few questions here to kind of get the conversation going. The first being, how does the historic context statement provide a frame of reference for the Cultural Heritage Master Plan? And I'll turn this question and the next 2 over to Emma.
Thanks so much, Laura. So, we'll talk through some quick answers to some of these questions, and then, if they sort of are sparking other questions that are coming up, then we're happy to answer those as well. But just to start it off, how does the historic context statement provide that frame of reference for the Cultural Heritage Master Plan? Part of this is just the key moment to consolidate all of this information. We know that there's lots of information floating around out there, and it both provides a framework for us to understand what's currently protected right now and whether there are kind of theme areas that would maybe necessitate the protection of different types of resources or different clusters of resources. It helps us look at the existing roster of heritage resources with a kind of informative lens about what's of value. We expect the historic context statement to also potentially change based on the information that's coming in through the public engagement process. So we're going to make sure that that's well-rounded as well. And it'll also help us to identify potential cultural heritage landscapes, which Laura identified earlier as one of the objectives of this master plan process. I can move on to the next question as well, which is why are issues like land use planning, climate change, and cultural economic development relevant to the Halton Hills Heritage Program? And the answer is really that we do see sometimes that different kind of departments and different municipal initiatives tend to work separately. So there's somebody taking a look at, if there are areas of a town where there's going to be big urban expansion into agricultural areas that might have historic farms, for example, and then separately, maybe the heritage department is looking at protections for those historic farmsteads. But something that we've seen is that if they're not really working together and don't have kind of a strategic approach to what happens when there are those growth areas and what happens to those historic farmsteads, then we see less success in terms of that change management moving forward. So we want to make sure that the Cultural Heritage Master Plan has a really good understanding of all of the other things that are happening in town, whether they're policy driven, whether they're driven by kind of economic development and businesses that are doing cool things in town, whether they're driven by climate change, for example, and make sure that we know how the heritage resources are going to be protected in the face of all those changes that might be coming. Do you want me to move on to the last one as well, Laura? So, okay. How will the public engagement results inform the cultural heritage master plan? So, I think in part, we want to wait until the public engagement period closes so that we can fully understand the answer to this question. But as an example of some of the ways that it'll inform it, for example, it's going to inform the historic context statement. I think we also, a big one is that the results are going to inform the vision and objectives for the cultural heritage master plan. And then, we will pull in other areas of expertise, best practices and precedents for policies to support those vision and objectives. But it's not really up to us at ERA Architects to determine the vision and objectives for the master plan. It's really up to the community here in Halton Hills to drive that vision and objectives, and then we can strategize ways to make sure that those are implemented and achieved.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. Not seeing any raised hands, please feel free to do so or type in the chat, but maybe we'll move to the next set of questions, and you can percolate some questions in your mind while we go over these ones here. So the first question is about the existing conditions report and public consultation paper being shared publicly. Certainly, yes, we anticipate a final version towards the end of this year, and all that information will be posted for you on our Let's Talk Halton Hills page. And the second question there is, will we have the opportunity to provide feedback on the Cultural Heritage Master Plan? Absolutely, yes. As Emma said, this process is really about community feedback and what's important to the community in Halton Hills. So there's lots of opportunities for you to call or email or submit something on Let's Talk Halton Hills. So please feel free to keep doing that and sharing with people that you know. Emma, if there's anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will also come a time in sort of a more formal capacity. We do intend to have this be a back and forth, and the Let's Talk Halton Hills webpage is going to be available over the course of this sort of long 2-year project. But there will come a time as well where the Cultural Heritage Master Plan gets drafted up. It's not for a number of months, if a little longer, but there will come a time when that also becomes publicly available and there will be another meeting like this one where we can have conversations about what's included, whether something else should be included, etc. So this is yes, a long-term engagement process, I would say.
Perfect, thank you, Emma. So we'll move to the next set of questions just to keep this going regarding specifically the Cultural Heritage Master Plan itself and what's it all about. So our first question is, what will the Cultural Heritage Master Plan add to Halton Hills' existing heritage planning framework? And along the same lines, how will the Cultural Heritage Master Plan layer onto separate municipal policies and strategic initiatives? So I'll provide some answers to this, and then I'll pass it back to Emma if she has anything to add. Certainly, what we're aiming to do with part of this project is to look at the existing heritage policy framework that we have now. What are the tools we have in place? What's the direction we have in our official plan? And how can we build on that to better protect our cultural heritage resources? The master plan will identify potentially more cultural heritage resources and landscapes than we've already identified, look at the tools we have and ask, do we need additional tools? Do we need additional policies? So those all are anticipated to work with our existing policy framework, but really provide us an opportunity to build on that and make it even better. Emma, I'll turn it over to you if you have anything to add.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's right, Laura. And part of this is really a consolidation exercise to make sure that there is one place that makes it clear what the town's kind of plan is for heritage resources. And I'm not sure if you specifically spoke to the layering onto separate municipal policies and strategic initiatives. Something we've been finding throughout the existing conditions report is that there are a lot of existing policy documents that are already doing or are doing part of some of the things that we might want to see the heritage program doing. And so, for example, The Greenbelt and Niagara Escarpment Plan protections are doing some work already to conserve what might be historic farmsteads located within their boundaries. Or the Public Art Master Plan is talking about kind of strategic ways to drive cultural economic development. Same with the Cultural Master Plan, to drive cultural economic development that celebrates Halton Hills history and heritage values, and tries to find ways to share those with people who might be visiting and to draw people in. We want to find ways for the protections available under the Ontario Heritage Act to complement those existing policies that are already doing some of this work. And in some places they already are, but we want to be explicit and strategic about it and make sure that they're working together as best that they can.
Fantastic. So moving on to the third question there, will the Cultural Heritage Master Plan include additional protections for valued heritage resources? Definitely it will. We anticipate that it will recommend additional tools. One of the interesting things about heritage and cultural heritage is the many different policy tools we have in a toolkit to protect what's essential about each one of those things. So while we have the Ontario Heritage Act, which is our provincial heritage policy, there are other tools at our disposal that we could use for these resources as well. So we're anticipating, along with identification, we'll also be adding protection or bringing additional protections in with existing protections for identified cultural heritage resources. So I see we have a question in the chat, so I'll ask Darshi to read out our first question.
We've got a question from Councillor Lawler, and it says, will the master plan enhance our understanding of Indigenous history in this area by mapping, identifying places where, for example, members of the Mississaugas of the Credit would have lived?
Thank you, Darshi. I'll turn this one over to Emma.
Thank you so much for the question. I think it's our hope that some of that can happen for sure. Right now, we're going through a process where we're using this initial period during the existing conditions report to do some initial outreach to the communities that consider Halton Hills their traditional territory, or in the Mississaugas case, their treaty territory. And we are sort of, part of that is letting or having them direct the extent to which they are interested in being involved with or informing Halton Hills Heritage Program. So the initial interest that's been expressed is to kind of review the historic context statement. The historic context statement was already prepared using resources about the Mississaugas of the Credit community history that were prepared by them, so from their own voice. So that was integrated into the drafting of the historic context statement. They're now reviewing to see if it kind of accurately reflects the way that they speak about their own history, and they're going to be providing us with some feedback on that front. I think that's certainly the next step question of what are the places that are important and significant for you. We're hoping is a conversation that comes out of this review of the existing conditions report, of the historic context statement. But again, in part, we're gonna take cues from them on how involved they want to be, if there are places where they want to see protections. There are also questions, I think, about archaeological sites and whether those are considered mappable, or whether they would like those to be mappable and shared. So we're taking our cues from them in these initial conversations.
Thanks, Emma. We have another question in the chat, and it's about religious offerings. Kevin, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, so I can certainly answer this question for now. And I'm going to speak to it broadly because I don't want to go into all the details at this time. But there have been some concerns at McNabb Park with respect to the scattering of cremated remains and the associated river offerings that go with them. But this matter was reviewed by council earlier this year. And I guess what I would say about it is that council didn't change any laws at that time. We simply made some interpretations of our existing bylaws, provincial policies, and the sort of approach of other municipalities. And we continue to work with our local partners as well as the Hindu Federation to try and balance what we know is a sensitive topic. Just to be clear, the town's position is that river offerings are not allowed in the Credit River, but everybody recognizes that enforcement of that is a bit of a challenge. So I certainly would suggest, if you have comments about that, you can put them on the Let's Talk page. And certainly if you want more information, you're welcome to follow up with me as well. I guess my contact information can be provided through the chat or whatever makes sense. But certainly that's something that council's aware of. We've been to council and we'll probably be back to council at a time later this year or early next year to report on sort of what's happened over the course of this year.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And as Kevin noted, please feel free to send any questions about this particular issue or any other issue directly to me or the project team through Let's Talk Halton Hills, and we'd be happy to give you some more information. I see Councillor Lewis has his hand raised.
Go ahead, please, Councillor Lewis.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I just kept coming up on my screen saying not. Anyway, allow me just to ask this, either of Emma and Laura. There was a panel you put up there listing some of the rural urban areas, and I'll just say Glen Williams, and I can't even remember what all they were and didn't write them down. But on one of the screens, there were a number, I'll say 5 or 6, that were clearly identified. I submit that within our rural area, there are many places, and I've listed some of them: Speyside, North Speyside, Balnafad, Terracotta, Whaley's Corners. Some of those are unique in the fact that there are shared boundaries with other communities. Crusen's Corners, Ash Grove, Hornby, Limehouse, Churchill, Hornby, Hornby was twice, Stewarttown. And in addition to that, all the rural schools. There is so much history that's out there relative to these small areas that at one point in time may have been a train stop, may have been a crossing on the road, it may have been a school site. And I think if we did our homework, we'd find out that all of the rural schools, even they don't exist today, all had characters and people that represented, and I'll say brought a lot of history to our communities. I don't want to see them lost. And I think if you're going to list some, I would simply say, I think it would be incumbent upon us all to list all of the rural areas that we've had within Halton Hills over the years. Amen.
Could I speak to this, Laura? Thank you so much, Councillor Lewis. We so wholeheartedly agree, and I think that that's been one of the most interesting things about studying a town that spans so many different types of character areas, from sort of much more urban places to smaller hamlets to even smaller rural or crossroads communities to rural places. The reason that the 6 that are listed are identified is because they have kind of clusters of heritage resources that have already been identified that sort of meet a particular threshold, but it really is not, it's not sort of a be all end all definition of them, and it does not need to be an all encompassing list. I think, to your point, there are certainly other communities that have clusters of resources, and we can be certainly speaking about them as historic hamlets or historic villages or crossroads communities for sure. I'm glad that you raised the rural schools, because it's something that we specifically speak to in the draft existing conditions report that's being developed as a particular type of heritage resource that kind of works as there's a set of them throughout town, and they kind of work as resources that are no longer necessarily used for how they were originally built. They are too small to be schoolhouses today, but the ones that still exist today have great potential for adaptive reuse and might be more conducive to certain uses than others. And we will want to make sure that there are strategic initiatives in place to make sure that assets like that get conserved. And then when you take assets like that and assets like a general store or a place of worship, these are the types of things that come together to sort of mark something as a recognizable crossroads community or a recognizable historic hamlet. So we can absolutely make sure that we are investigating strategic initiatives and policies to support the conservation of the places that are still legible and intact today, and then potentially the interpretation or commemoration of the ones that are seeing a little bit more change and that maybe are less legible today.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. I'm not seeing any additional hands raised, but please feel free to continue asking questions. But for now, I think we'll move back to you, Emma, so soon to provide some next steps for the Cultural Heritage Master Plan process. And as noted, please feel free to follow up with us with any additional questions you might have. Back to you, Emma.
For sure, and we can certainly come back to this last page if there are additional comments at the end. So in terms of next steps, just to provide a really quick overview, we are going to be spending the next few weeks closing the engagement period. And really what that mostly means is that the survey and interactive map on the Let's Talk Halton Hills webpage is going to be closed this Sunday. This is the final week that it's running. And then we're going to be taking all the information that we've received on it and distilling it and kind of synthesizing it and understanding what we've learned based on what people have shared. We're going to be then finalizing the existing conditions report and developing the public consultation paper that summarizes everything we've learned from our stakeholder engagement, incorporating those public engagement materials. And then come January, we're going to sit down and take a look at that existing conditions report with fresh eyes and begin strategizing around the vision and objectives based on what we've heard from you. And then the strategic initiatives, policies, and incentives that will help to achieve them. As noted many times this evening, we encourage you to stay engaged with this project over the next number of months. We're posting bi-monthly updates on the project blog so that you can follow along, even though there will be a number of months where there might not be kind of new information being shared on the website or any new meetings coming up. Please, if you haven't already done so, go to this website shown here and complete the survey and interactive mapping exercise this week before it closes on Sunday. Please also share around your networks to your spouses or colleagues or kids or neighbors or friends so that we can get as much feedback as possible before the engagement period closes. If you have any additional comments or questions or would like to follow up on tonight's discussion, please feel free to contact myself or Laura and Tharshi at the Town of Halton Hills. Our contact information is shown here if you can take a quick screenshot, but it's also available on the Let's Talk Halton Hills webpage. So you can go straight there if something occurs to you tomorrow that you really want to share. And Laura, I can turn it over to you either for some concluding remarks or for any additional questions that are popping up.
Thanks so much, Emma. So it looks like we might be ending a few minutes early this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for spending time listening to what we're working on and what we're excited about with cultural heritage in the town. And thank you to our mayor and members of council for attending tonight as well. As mentioned before, head over to Let's Talk to do the survey and to find materials from this evening's presentation within the next week or so. Thank you again for joining us. Your input is really important to this process. We can't emphasize that enough. And we're really looking forward to having a really wholesome, fulsome policy document at the end of this that really identifies, protects, and celebrates our unique cultural heritage in the town of Halton Hills. We look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.